So good afternoon, everyone. So firstly, I would like to thank USTC for the great opportunity to be here with all of you today. But I also would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your afternoon to be here with us. We do hope that you will get some useful insights and recommendations and tips that's going to help you to improve the discoverability of your paper once it's been published. Now, before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce myself and how I got to where I am today. So, as Mohammed mentioned, I received my PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. But once I received my degree, I decided to leave the US and move to Asia. So I've been living in Asia now for over 20 years. I'm currently based in Tokyo as I work for our Nature Japan office. But before I joined Nature, I was actively conducting research at institutes in Singapore as well as in Japan. In that time, I had published a number of international articles, and I was actively involved as being a reviewer for a number of international journals. But about 12 years ago, I decided to leave research, and I joined an academic editing company, where I got to work with researchers individually to help them improve the quality of their manuscripts before submitting them to their target journals. Then about 8 years ago, I joined Nature as editorial development manager, where one of my key responsibilities is developing and conducting training workshops for researchers worldwide to help improve the impact of their publications, establish their reputation in the field. Now, although I work for Nature, we are part of a larger company called Springer Nature. So we also publish books and journals under our Springer brand. We have open access journals under our BMC brand. So altogether, we have over 3,000 journals across a range of different disciplines. And both the Nature side and the Springer side have been in business for over 150 years each. So we do have quite a bit of experience when it comes to academic publishing. And what we're hoping to do in our short time together today is to give me an opportunity to share some of that experience and advice with all of you. Give you some greater insights of what's going to help you to improve the impact of the papers that you publish. Now, within Nature, of course, people are probably familiar with the back part of Nature, or the journal that we publish. But we also have a number of different types of products and solutions to help to support researchers. And that's the team that I'm in. And the team is called Researcher Solutions. And within that, we have our Training Solutions team to provide training for researchers worldwide. On one side, we have our on-demand course, the Nature Masterclasses on Demand, which I know is currently available here at USTC. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you have actually logged in and used the Nature Masterclass on Demand course? Okay, a few of you, it's completely free, so I do encourage you, please log in. There's a lot of useful information in there, covering a broad range of different topics: writing grants, science communication, academic publishing, etc. So I'm working in our live workshop section, where we're providing live training workshops like this for researchers. We have those that are done directly from Nature editors, usually very small, 25 or 30 people. And then we have the trainer-led courses, which are the ones that I'm involved with, that are meant for bigger audiences and broader audiences to really try to establish skills amongst early career researchers, hopefully helping them to be more successful throughout their careers. So with that, let's now move on to the topic of today: maximizing the discoverability of your article. Why did I choose this topic? Well, one, it's short enough that I can communicate it thoroughly in the time we have together today. But it's also something you have to be very concerned about. You are not the only person publishing papers on your topic. There's a lot of papers getting published every year related to what you're working on. So let's consider an example. Let's say for medicine, I'm going to pick just one discipline. How many papers do you think were published in medicine alone just last year? 200,000? 400,000? 600,000? Or 800,000? Let's get some insights from people here today. 800,000. What do you think, sir? 600,000? 600. Anyone think 200?
More than 800.
400? Who thinks 600? Raise your hand. Who thinks 800,000? No, 600 is actually closest. A lot of people do choose the biggest number. They assume I put the biggest number is what's going to be correct. But it is over 604,000 articles. But keep in mind, that means every single day last year, there were over 1,600 articles published in medicine alone. And that's going to be quite true across a variety of different disciplines. Yours is not the only paper. People don't have to read your article. There's a lot of other articles they can read instead. So your job then is to hope that when you publish your work, people choose your paper amongst all of the others. And that's something that I feel that many authors don't really put enough time into, which means all of that hard work that you've put into your study, obtaining results, analyzing, writing the paper, is wasted because no one is reading that article. So you do need to have effective strategies then to ensure that your paper, once it's published, stands out. And that's really going to be the focus for our short workshop today. Now, to help you to ensure your paper stands out, we're going to be discussing how do you write a title that gets someone's attention. That's the first thing people see about your paper. We're also going to talk about the importance of choosing keywords and using them effectively to improve discoverability of your article online. And then we're going to be talking about abstracts and how to write one that's going to influence people to download your article. And if we have time, I'm going to give you some other potential strategies you can also use to further improve your visibility after publication. So let's start with titles. 30 or 40 years ago, writing a good title was not that critical. Why? People didn't find research online at that time. They'd go down to the university library, take off their favorite journal off the shelf, and look through that issue. Yeah, they see the title and the abstract, but they're also seeing all of the data. And it's probably the data that they see that will influence them. This isn't the paper I need to read. And they'll photocopy it and read it. How many of you still find articles that way? I don't think anybody does. Maybe I'll just, of course, go online, put in some keywords, and then we're just going to see page after page of titles. Like this. So let's say I was searching for van der Waals heterostructures. And I go into my database, and you can see I find in a 5-year publication window over 4,000 papers on that one specific topic. And I'm going to choose which one based on the title that stands out to me. And people look through this list quickly, as I'm sure you do. You're not carefully reading every title, thinking about it, and then move on to the next one. We're all busy people. So you need to write your title in a way that gets people's attention as quickly as possible. So to do so, of course, there's some important points to keep in mind. Most importantly, you need to state what your paper is about. What have you achieved? That's what people want to know. But you also need to ensure that your title contains keywords. Now, keywords here has two different meanings. One for indexing purposes. These abstracting databases are going to use keywords to index your paper. They're going to use your keyword list and your title. So you need to ensure your title has good keywords to improve the indexing of your article online. And that's also good to keep in mind because that means you don't want to duplicate words from your title and the keyword list. They are redundant. And redundancy won't help you to improve visibility. But another reason you need to ensure that your title has good keywords, that's what people see. People don't see the keyword list. What they will see is the title. And as long as your title has the keywords that they're looking for, in this case, van der Waals heterostructures, they know that paper is related to their topic of interest. If you see a title that did not contain this keyword, they would likely assume it's a false match and probably skip it. So please, to ensure that your paper does not get skipped over, make sure the important keywords are included in that title. And try to keep it short. Generally for natural sciences, we recommend that your title should only have 10 to 12 words, no more than that. Why? Well, if it's short, in this case, I searched for PD-L1 expression in tumor, and there's still over 5,000 papers in 5 years. But as long as the title is short, people can read through it quickly. And I think most of us can agree these two titles are relatively quick and easy to read through. What about this one? How many of you would actually take the time to read this entire title? Not many. So if your title is too long, people may skip over it. So the shorter you keep it, you're increasing the likelihood someone reads the entire title. And if they read that entire title, they understand why your study is important. So now that we've talked about things you should keep in mind, let's also talk about what to avoid. Firstly, avoid questions. Sometimes people think, well, Jeff, to make my title stand out, I'll make it a question, or I'll make it a pun. I'll make it clever in some way. Problem is, these clever titles are only clever to the author. They're usually confusing to everyone else. Don't make your readers try to guess what your study is about. They don't want it to be a game. They just want to know exactly what did you do. You also want to avoid being vague with your title. Like a characterization of, an investigation of. Yes, you're publishing a research article. We know you investigated something. Be specific what was being investigated. That's what readers want to know. You also need to be careful with abbreviations, but that will depend on your target audience and the journal you publish with. So let's say you evaluate your study, you think that people outside of your research area would find your study interesting or valuable. Well, they're probably not familiar with a lot of the abbreviations or acronyms that you may frequently use in your discipline. And if you use those abbreviations, they won't understand the title. If they don't understand the title, they don't know why your study is important. And that's why generally for broad focus journals, the editors do not want you to use abbreviations and acronyms. Conversely, maybe you evaluated your work and you think it's really only going to be interesting or useful to people in your specific research area. So you're probably going to publish it in a specialized journal, that's what they're for. But it also means that most of your readers would likely be familiar with those abbreviations. And therefore, using those abbreviations is probably okay. So for broad focus journals, I recommend avoid abbreviations. Specialized journals, they may be appropriate. So please always consider your target audience. And lastly, you don't need to say that your research is new. It won't get published if it's not. Everybody knows what you have identified as something new for the field. That's probably one of the most important criteria for acceptance. This is something that people already know. Now, if you want to use new and novel in your abstract main text, that's fine. But your title is meant to be as short and as concise as possible. So avoid any unnecessary words. Now, although I often go through all of these recommendations with authors, they still sometimes tell me, but Jeff, doing this is not that easy. You're telling me to summarize what I've achieved in my study in 10 to 12 words. That is not an easy thing to do. But that tells me then for those types of authors that they're not using a useful strategy to write their title. And as long as you are using a useful strategy, writing an effective title is quite easy. So we want to consider what is important about our study. Well, there are 3 key things that we should be telling the reader that our study is about. First thing, we want to tell them what we are investigating. Some sort of variable, condition, model, strategy. You're investigating something. And whatever you're investigating is going to have some sort of effect. So what are you going to be measuring in the study? Maybe a primary outcome, maybe you have 2 outcomes that you're going to investigate. And of course, these outcomes that you're measuring are being measured from somewhere. That's your sample. It could be a population, a database, an animal model, cells. These are basically the things that people want to know about your study. So if you want to write an effective title, simply identify these 3 key factors, put them together, and then you'll have a clear title. Let me show you an example of a title that originally had all 3 things, but then I removed one of them. Evaluation of PGBD5 in human tumors. So this PGBD5 is just the name of a protein. So evaluation of this protein in human tumors. So for this title, what do you think I removed?
Evaluation.
Did I remove variable, outcome, or sample? What do you think? Heard someone yell something out already? Outcome. Exactly. We know they're investigating this protein, and we know they're measuring something from tumors, but what we don't know is what are they evaluating? That's the outcome. This is an example of these vague titles that I recommend that you avoid. So, to write a good title, we first identify the 3 key factors that this study is focused on. In this case, they're investigating this protein. They're measuring oncogenic mutations, and they measure these mutations from human tumors. So all you have to do is put those 3 things together, and here we have the published title. PGBD5 promotes site-specific oncogenic mutations in human tumors. But this title tells us something else as well. What is the effect that's seen? What effect does this protein have on the mutations? Promotes. This is what we call a declarative title. Generally, we'll be using an active verb to describe the effect that was seen. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 words. Yet you thoroughly know exactly what this study is about. So if you want to write an effective title, just use this strategy. You already know what your study is about, so it should be easy to identify those 3 factors. Put them together, emphasize the result that was seen, often with an active verb, and you'll have a clear yet concise title. Here's another example from material science. Slightly different organization, but the same basic information. resilient yet entirely degradable, that's what they're evaluating. Gelatin-based biogels, that's what they're investigating. For soft robots and electronics, that's the sample. And by the way that they wrote the title, we know that these biogels are both resilient and degradable, so we know the effect. So you can either do variable outcome sample, or in this case, outcome describing the variable that was seen for a specific sample. Both strategies are fine, whatever you feel best emphasizes the key, what's important about your research. Generally, I recommend to put what's most important first in your title. In this case, maybe what was most important was the outcome. Maybe in the previous one, they wanted to emphasize what they're investigating, maybe hadn't been thought to be involved in oncogenic mutations and tumors. So that can help you determine which order you may want to use for your title, but both effective. And here's one more: forest vulnerability to drought controlled by bedrock composition. Again, slightly different strategy in how it's organized, but still has the sample, outcome, and variable, and it tells you the result. So as long as you include all three key variables and emphasize the result that was seen, you have a clearly written title for your paper. And that will help to ensure, in a very short, concise way, people know exactly what you've been able to achieve with your research. So now that we've talked a bit about writing those titles, let's consider how those titles are organized. So in this case, there's over 5,100 titles. That means some titles are at the top, but that means other titles are at the bottom. How many of you would read through all 5,100 titles? Most people would read the first page, second page, maybe the third page if you're really ambitious. After that, you probably try a new keyword search. That's probably only about 150 papers. All of the other thousands of papers would never even be looked at if people did this keyword search. So even if you wrote a really good title, maybe nobody sees it. Have you ever thought of how these titles are organized? How does, in this case, PubMed, how does PubMed know what to put first and what to put at the bottom? Anyone over here, any ideas? No wrong answer. What do you think? How do they know which one's at the top, which at the bottom? Okay, that's okay. Another suggestion. How about you? How do you think? We always see this, but probably never thought about how they were actually ordered to begin with. Maybe by citation. That's a very common suggestion. How many people think that maybe citations will influence the order? It does for Google Scholar, but not for abstracting databases like this. Any other ideas? Let's ask someone on this side of the room. My hint is it's not citations. What about you? Oh, yes, sir.
Look at the years. Years are same or different?
Search engine optimization. You're exactly correct. But how do they know how to optimize? So he is right. It's related to search engine optimization. That means we're optimizing something for the search engines. What are we optimizing? Keywords. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I talk to authors and I say, oh, how did you identify your keywords? I don't know. The journal said I needed 6 to 8 keywords. I just wrote some down. And that told me they don't realize the keywords they chose will determine whether or not their title is going to be seen. You need to have good keywords. And once you have those good keywords, you need to use search engine optimization. And by using that strategy, you can ensure that your paper will be discoverable in those databases. Now, all of these databases use search engine optimization because that's what they are. They are search engines, just like Google or Baidu or any other. So if you want to improve your discoverability, they're essentially assigning, based on this algorithm, a relevancy score for your paper based on those keywords. And so as long as you use that system carefully, you can ensure when people search for those keywords, yours will have a high relevancy score, top of the list, and not a low relevancy score, bottom of the list. So let's talk about this in two different steps. First step, of course, is to identify the good keywords. Once you identify those keywords that you know are best to describe your study for those databases, then you need to optimize those keywords. So let's talk about the first step. That's the easier one. Essentially, you want to start off with a short list. Now, whenever we talk about good keywords, I think it's good or useful to look at an example of what bad keywords look like. So here's a neuroscience paper published a few years ago, and I was looking through the keywords. Some of them looked okay, but some of them stood out as looking highly suspicious. Connect-based virtual reality training, region of interest, grant-supported paper. Well, I was curious. This journal is indexed in PubMed, so I wanted to test whether or not these are actually good keywords. So I limited my search to a 5-year publication window. And the first one I tested was Connect-based virtual reality training. If you don't know what Connect is, I'm not surprised because it's discontinued. But it was made by Microsoft as a virtual reality companion for Xbox. And this is what it looks like. So when we're doing this keyword search, we're going to be looking for those papers doing virtual reality training, specifically using this device. So when I put this in, do you think I found very few keywords or a lot? Let me ask some of them in the back. Don't want them to feel that they're getting ignored. So how about you, Mel? Do you think I found a lot of articles or very few? Very few. Yes, you're right. I found 8. Of the hundreds of thousands of papers in PubMed, I found 8. That tells me that this keyword is highly specific and not one that most people would actually use. What about region of interest? Very generic term. Do you think I found a lot of papers or a few? What do you think, sir? You think I found few? Any other people think I found a lot? 290,000. That means this paper will be diluted out by 291,661 other papers. What do you think is the likelihood that it's going to be at the top of the list? Not very likely. What about grant-supported paper? Now, to explain this, let me just emphasize one thing about these abstracting databases. They are abstracting databases. That means they only have available to them to search title, keywords, and abstracts. So when was the last time you read an abstract where they said, by the way, we are a grant-supported paper? Think I found a few or a lot? Few. Yes, I found one. This paper. So this tells us this is highly too specific. So we have some keywords that are far too specific, and we have other keywords that are far too broad to be useful. Now, as an example, for comparison, if I looked at neurological rehabilitation, I see about 12,000 keywords. That one's probably 12,000 articles, and that's probably okay. Now, whenever I show this type of exercise to people, they say, great, Jeff. So what's the number of articles that I should be looking for so I know that my keyword is good? What is that magic number? And unfortunately, I hate to say, there is no magic number. But don't worry. The reason for that is not because there's no specific word, no specific number, but rather there's too many things that's going to affect the number of articles you see. So in that case, the previous case, I was using PubMed. PubMed indexes about 6,000 journals. If I use Scopus, they index 26,000 journals. So of course, I'll find a lot more papers in Scopus than I would in PubMed. Also, it's going to depend upon the time frame you used. I use a 5-year publication window, but of course I might find much fewer if I use a 2-year publication window, and a lot more if I didn't limit by time. And lastly, it would depend on how common that topic is. Something investigated globally will have a lot more articles than something that's only investigated regionally. And those topics that are more broadly studied across a variety of different research areas, of course, will have more articles than something very niche or specialized. So unfortunately, because of all of this, I can't tell you how many articles you should find. What I can tell you is how to do it yourself. It's actually very simple. You simply determine it empirically. And I did an example already. You test your keywords. Those with very broad numbers are going to be not useful, you shouldn't use. Those with very few numbers are also not useful, you shouldn't use. Those that are more in the middle are probably the ones specific enough to identify your paper, but broad enough to actually be useful. And I'll show you an example of this again in a few slides. So there is no magic number, but it's actually quite easy to determine it yourself. And keep in mind, every study you do will have a different number because it's focused on a different topic. So the first thing you want to do is identify a shortlist that you can actually test. Now, commonly people get confused that when we say keywords, that we mean it has to be a single word. Actually, we recommend it's not a single word, but rather 2 or 3 words to be a key phrase. And even though it's 2 or 3 words, it still counts as a single keyword. So don't think if you have 8 keywords and then you had in each you have phrases that would make up all of them very quickly. It's how many words, comma, how many words, comma. Every time you separate a phrase by a comma, then it will determine the number of keywords. So let's, for example, compare circuits with photonic integrated circuits. Circuits, if I look at this in Web of Science, I can see 130,000 articles in a 5-year publication window. Not only is it really a lot of articles, but it's across a range of different disciplines. Electrical engineering, materials science, applied physics, neuroscience, energy fuels, because circuits could be neuronal circuits. There's a lot of, the word circuits has a very generic term. But if we use photonic integrated circuits, not only do we have much fewer articles, but we can see they're all within the same basic field, which means you're not being diluted out from papers from other disciplines. You're really further improving the discoverability of that article online. So that's why using these phrases is a lot more efficient for you than a single word. So once you've identified those keywords, it can be ones that you've thought of, you think you would use to find papers like yours. You could look at published articles, what keywords do they use, and then maybe other kind of keyword lists, like in Medline, have what they call medical subject headings, mesh terms. And then you simply test them in databases, plural. Why should you use more than one database? Let me see a show of hands. Who here uses Web of Science to search for articles? Raise your hand. Okay. Scopus, PubMed, EI Compendix, IEEE Explorer. Any other databases that you use? Google Scholar? Yeah.
Of course.
As you can see, nobody uses one database. You can never predict, everyone in my field will use this database, Jeff. It's not a problem. You don't know what database people use. My recommendation is to always test your keywords into 2 databases, one broad focused database, like Web of Science or Scopus, and then a specialized database for your field. And therefore, for people in your field, regardless if they use that specialized database or a broad focused database, you know that your paper will have improved visibility. And so you compare the good keywords in one with the other. When you see that overlap, you know those are the best ones for you to use. So let me show you an example of how this empirical sorting strategy can work. Let's say you're interested in how heavy metal like cadmium may be affecting public health. So you have a list of different keywords that you think may be appropriate for that. You test it in this case, Science Citation Index and Web of Science. And then in the right column, we have the number of articles. We can quickly now see some of these keywords give us really large numbers or very small numbers. Those ones we should probably avoid. On the other hand, these ones give us article a number in the middle. So it tells us of the ones in this list, these are probably more appropriate. Now, in this case, because it's more clinical or public health related, I would want to repeat this into PubMed to validate, yes, these are the good keywords, regardless of the database being used. So that's how you can determine it yourself. It's not very difficult. It will only take you a few minutes. So when you do this, you should be able to remove maybe 4 or 5 keywords that are too broad or too specialized. Next step is you then put the 2 or 3 most important keywords in your title and the rest in the keyword list. Why should you put the most important ones in the title? That's what people see. When they download your article, they may see the keyword list, not in the database. The algorithm sees everything, but people only see the title. So you need to make sure the most important words are there. So in this case, first step is done. We have identified the good keywords and we have used them across our title and keyword list. Next step is to optimize them. How do you optimize these keywords? Well, these are abstracting databases. So what these algorithms do is they want to determine, okay, you say that these keywords are about your study. How can they be confident that they do? They look to see if those keywords are found in your abstract. And if those keywords are not in your abstract, the algorithm will assign your paper a low relevancy score, bottom of the list. But if they see some of the important keywords, you've used them maybe 3 or more times in the abstract, it means they are relevant for your study, high relevancy score. So as long as you're using the most important keywords several times in your abstract, you increase the chances that your paper will be found towards the top of the list rather than the bottom. Now that works fine when we're talking about abstracting databases. As I mentioned earlier, Google Scholar is not an abstracting database, which means they are not limited by the abstract. If they can find your entire paper, they will search your entire paper. And Google is usually pretty good at finding the entire paper somewhere online. So they're going to look through that paper to highlight those specific keywords to determine relevancy. But they will give different parts of the paper greater weight. Greatest weight will be in the title, followed by the abstract, so that's related to the abstracting databases. But they also look at your subheadings. If they see you've used these keywords in your subheadings, it means it is relevant for your study, higher relevancy score. And they're also going to look at figure captions. If you're using those keywords to describe your data, it means they are in fact relevant for your study, high relevancy score. For the main text, it mostly ignores, so you don't need to worry so much about. So in addition, for the abstracting databases, we have to be concerned with the title and abstract, but for Google Scholar, you should also use those keywords in your subheadings as well as in the figure captions. But Google Scholar goes one extra step further. They're not just doing a keyword matching, they're also looking to see how many people are discussing your article online, something they call the PageRank algorithm. And simply the more links they see pointing to your article means this article is more relevant for the field. Higher relevancy score. Well, how can you do that? Make sure you promote your paper after publication. Social media, institutional websites, personal blogs. The more links Google sees, it will improve the relevancy score further. Now there's one more thing that Google Scholar does, but there's nothing you can do about right now. They will include, as I mentioned earlier, citations. But it usually takes 2 or 3 years for your paper to accumulate enough citations to have any effect on its discoverability in Google Scholar. So hopefully you publish in a good journal, you write your paper well, you have great visibility. All of that will increase your chance of citations. So further down the road, you're even improving its discoverability. But another reason I always like to highlight that in these types of lectures is that for many people using Google Scholar, which many of you said you are, you may often notice when you're doing a keyword search, a lot of old papers come up at the top. That's because of the influence of citations. So I do encourage you to put like a 2-year limit on Google Scholar, so you're filtering out all of those older papers and really just focus on the recently published articles instead. So that's how you can use keywords to help ensure that your paper, once it's published, is actually visible to people in the field. So the third way we can then ensure, or hopefully increase the chances that someone downloads that paper is to write a good abstract. For me, I would argue that your abstract is the most important part of the entire paper for several reasons. To highlight the first reason, let me ask some people. I'll start with you, Mohammed. How many articles per week do you usually read? 4 or 5 articles, okay. What about you, sir? 6 or 7. Okay, so one more person in the back. How about you, sir? About 6 or 7. Why aren't you reading more than that?
Article do you read in one day? What is article, bro?
You're busy. How many of you are busy every day? I hope you're all raising your hands. It'd be nice if we could just sit back all day and just read papers without worrying about doing our own research. But in reality, that's not the case. And you're not alone. That's true for everyone. But as I showed you, even for specific topics, there may be over 1,000 articles per year getting published on it. But we don't have time to read everything. So what most researchers do, and I hope you are all doing the same, they try to stay up to date by reading abstracts as frequently as possible. But that means, as an author, we need to remember, unfortunately, that for most people in our field, the abstract will be the only thing they read. It would be great if they read our paper, and I'm sure they wish they could read your paper, but they're busy. They can't read everything. And that means for many people in your field, this may be your only chance to really have impact, to influence them, to tell them about what you have done. And you can only do that if you're writing your abstract well. But it's also probably what's going to increase the likelihood that they want to download your paper. Your title got their attention, they clicked on it, and then by reading the abstract, they'll think, yes, I'm busy, this paper's worth my time. I like to think of the strategy that many people use to find which articles to read as being very similar to going to a restaurant. So let's imagine after we finish and you finish your work for the day, you decide to go out and maybe have dinner. You see this restaurant, it looks nice on the outside. There's a long queue of people telling us it seems to be quite popular. However, you've never eaten there before, which means you're wondering, how do I know they actually have the food that I'm looking for at a price I'm willing to pay? So what most of us would likely do, instead of just getting in the line, we would probably ask to see the menu. And if that menu has the food that we're looking for at a price that we think is appropriate, then we're going to be agreeing to eat dinner there. I think finding an article is very similar. The title is like the storefront. It's what gets people's attention. But they want to know, before I dedicate my time to read that paper, what am I going to get? In that case, your abstract is like that menu. And as long as your abstract is convincing enough that your study is worth their time, they'll be more likely to download your paper, which means you're going to have greater impact, greater influence, and also increase the chances your paper gets cited. The more citations your papers get, it reflects positively on you throughout your academic careers. But in addition to peers in the field, do you think that your abstract may be useful for some other people as well? Let's ask some people on this side. So how about you, sir? So peers in the field, of course, they're going to find your abstract useful. Anybody else? Who else? So, like when you submit your paper to a journal, who's the first person to read it?
Editor.
Or before the researchers, the editor. And someone over there said the editor, exactly. And if the editor thinks your paper is interesting, they're then going to send it to whom?
Reviewer.
Reviewers. So I certainly agree. Editors is going to be also very important for their initial editorial evaluation. A lot of people don't realize it's also very influential for funding agencies. So you write your grant proposal, you submit it. The funding agency will then send it to researchers in your field. Those reviewers may not be in your specific research area. They're in your field, but may not be in your area. Yet one of the key things they need to evaluate about your proposal is novelty. Well, how can they determine the novelty of your proposal if they're not familiar with what's been published? So what those reviewers of grant proposals will do is go online, put in keywords related to your research proposal, and see what's been published recently. And they'll do so by scanning through the abstracts. And by doing so, they can then assign a novelty score to your research proposal, which may determine whether or not it gets adopted by the agency. So your abstract also helps to improve which proposals are accepted and which ones are not. But definitely also reviewers. Now for reviewers, we need to also, as you can see, I wrote potential reviewers. Because if an editor likes your paper, they think it's suitable for the scope of their journal, they're going to invite researchers in the field to be a reviewer. Invite them with an invitation email. In that invitation email, they cannot send them your paper. That violates confidentiality until they agree to be a reviewer. So what they do send them is your title and abstract. And if your abstract is not convincing enough to them, they'll simply decline that invitation. And especially for the top researchers in the field, these are the people that all the editors are sending invitations to. Those people are highly selective. They often tell me they're receiving 4, sometimes 5 email invitations per week, almost 1 per day. And they're going to only choose those papers they feel are really worth their time. Remember, they're not getting paid to be a reviewer. So they have every right to be very selective. So if you want to increase the likelihood you're getting a good quality peer review from top researchers in your field, you need to impress them with that abstract. So no other part of your paper really has such broad-reaching influence as your abstract does, which is why it's so important to write it well. Well, how do you ensure that you're giving all of those readers the information that they need? Well, there's 4 key things that an abstract should communicate. And of course, it's very similar to the structure of a published article. So what's the first section of a research article called?
Purpose.
Yeah, introduction may have purpose, but generally it's an introduction, introducing to the reader background about the topic, as well as the research question, the motivation behind the study. Well, so should your abstract. After you've given that introduction, what's the next part of the research paper? Your methods, materials, what did you do? Your aims, methodology, and just an overall description, like a summary of the study design. You don't have to go into specific details. And then what comes after that?
Findings.
Findings, your results. Well, so should your abstract.
We know research.
Highlight the 3 or 4 most important results from your work. Remember, this may be your only chance to do so. It'd be great if everyone could read our papers, but we know most people won't have time. This may be your only chance. And when you're talking about key results, you're not just going to list them, you need to summarize them, emphasizing their value to convince readers, yes, this study is impactful. And of course, at the end of your paper, you have your conclusions. So should your abstract. What is your conclusion, which is usually solving some sort of problem in the field, but also emphasize the implications or recommendations of the study. Sometimes I read these articles where they write, the implications of the study will be discussed. So if I don't download the article, I'm supposed to guess what the implications are after reading like a really short abstract in about 2 minutes without even seeing figures. I'll probably guess wrong. So you know what the implications or recommendations are. It is your goal to communicate that to the reader. And often it's the implications that will convince someone your paper is worth their time because they're working on the same goal. Problem is, unlike an article, most abstracts are not divided by sections. Some are, in medicine they are. But most other fields, they're written as a paragraph. And because of that, we often see some of this key information missing. So my recommendation, when you're writing an abstract, write it section by section. Let me show you an example. Here's a paper we published in Nature Materials. Cellular extrusion bioprinting improves kidney organoid reproducibility and conformation. And here's the abstract, written just as a block of text. But even though it's written as a block of text, it contains all 4 of those key sections. Because hopefully they wrote it section with each section in mind. So just first write your background. I recommend limit it to 2 sentences, no more than 3. Why? You have limited amount of space for an abstract, generally 200 to 250 words for most journals. And you want to spend most of that time talking about your study, not what's already been published. So my recommendation is 1 sentence introducing the topic and emphasizing its value or importance for the field, and then 1 sentence introducing your research question. This is important. Editors, reviewers, they want to know what is the novelty or the originality of your work. And usually how they define that is by looking at the research question. Means your paper is trying to overcome some important knowledge gap in the field. It's also useful to use keywords to help guide your reader. Remember, you don't have key sections, so the word however is a great way to introduce a research problem. Whenever people see the word however, people generally slow down and they read that next sentence more carefully. So use that to your advantage. Then you move on to your methods and aims. Generally, this can be described in a single sentence. So you can say, in this study, we use this methodology to evaluate this aim, which is the strategy these authors have used. Or you can say, in this study, we evaluated this aim using this methodology. Both are appropriate. But they allow you to communicate both the aims and methodology in a single sentence. And again, you don't need to give a lot of details, just a summary of the strategy that you used in your research. Then, of course, you want to spend most of your information in the results. Again, using keywords. We demonstrate, we show, we find. Telling the readers, okay, I'm not talking about my study design anymore. Now I'm sharing with you our key results, summarizing them, emphasizing their value. And then finally, have the end, again, using keywords, in conclusion, in summary. Reader now knows, okay, you're not describing your results anymore. Now you're telling us how you solved this important problem. And then also to include the implications. Either, in this case, the part of the same sentence, or you may want to have it as a separate sentence. But by writing your abstract section by section, you can then simply put them together. And now you have a clearly structured abstract emphasizing why your study needs to be done, what you did, what you found, and how this study is contributing to the field. All the information the readers are looking for. So writing good titles, choosing and optimizing good keywords, and clearly structuring your abstract are all excellent ways to improve your visibility. But there's still some additional strategies you can use as well after the paper has been published. Problem is, often we see, people publish their paper, they get that acceptance email, they think, great, now I can just relax and just wait for all those citations to come in. Please don't do that. Yes, hopefully you chose a good journal indexed in the right databases and you used all the strategies we talked about here. All of that will help to improve visibility. But I do encourage you to actively promote your work. So what are some ways that you can promote your published article?
ResearchGate.
ResearchGate's online promotions. That's one way to use online promotion.
LinkedIn.
How about someone over here in the middle? Any other strategies you can think of? Any other strategies? Attending conferences. Certainly that can be useful.
Also, giving seminars in universities.
Okay, so you're presenting not only at conferences, but also at university seminars. So presenting your research, certainly. LinkedIn, like social media, certainly. Anything else besides social media and presentations? One careful self-citation. What she said is share with your peers, and I certainly agree. But let's think, what is the most efficient way to really kind of discuss with peers? You write them emails? It's a lot of emails to write. Like conferences, and that's a key point. Presenting at conferences and seminars is great, but I think simply networking and engaging with others at conferences is also useful. Has anyone ever had a news story written about their paper before? It's not very common. More senior researchers do it more often. But I also encourage you to work with press offices at universities to write press releases and get media attention about your work. So yeah, I think all of these can be very useful strategies, international conferences or seminars, giving you an opportunity to present or network with others. Of course, using social media or other online promotion platforms like ResearchGate. And of course, I do encourage you to work with press offices. They can help you to write a press release and help you to get media attention, either regional or global media attention for your study. We have another, it's actually related to that, not to promote, but on the NMO, the Nature Masterclass Online, there's actually one of the courses is about science communication, about how to try to make your paper look newsworthy to a non-specialist, certainly. That's an entire whole course altogether. So in terms of conferences, I'm happy that she had mentioned about communicating, just discussing. Because people always think about has to be a presentation. Now, if you are invited to give a slide talk, that's great. It's a great opportunity. But most of us don't get that chance. We go to the conference, maybe we have a poster, posters are generally more unpublished research, or if it's in engineering, you may have like a preliminary paper in a conference proceedings. But at conferences, you will always have the opportunity, now that we're turning back to face, to sit down and talk to people. Lunches, coffee breaks, social events. Remember, the people at these conferences are exactly who you want to read your paper. They are in your field. Hopefully that's why you're at that conference, because the topic is related to your research. And so by talking to these people, finding out what they're working on, what they've published, you discuss what you're working on, what you've published. Someone may say, really? What journal was that in? I didn't see that paper yet. They write down the name of the journal, they go back to their hotel and download your article. Use that opportunity. And I emphasize that because especially with early career researchers at conferences, you often see them grouped together in the research group, not really discussing with the other people. Be active, network. Not only for this reason, especially early on in your career, you need to establish this network with other people and other research groups worldwide. Either A, you may want to be applying for a research position at an institute they may be familiar with or are part of. And by having someone who is in that institute may help you to get in the application process. You're also going to want to establish international collaborations. This is the best way to establish them. Sometimes people tell me, Jeff, I understand the importance of a collaboration. I'm emailing people, they never email me back. And that's not a great way to establish a relationship with someone. Remember, collaborations is not just that we have mutual interests, or we have complementary resources and expertise so we can help each other out. Collaborations are usually several years long, maybe even longer. So it's based on trust, it's based on confidence, it's based on respect. Is this someone I'm willing to work with for the next 3 or 4 years? And can I trust they're going to be honest and share their data with me, that they're not going to be manipulating their data? And usually it's hard to do that online. But if you sit down and talk to someone face to face, you can get a general sense of who that person is. Not just their background, what resources they have available, but the kind of person that they are. And if they match with your personality, you feel that you can have that long-term productive relationship, then fantastic. You can only do that if you're talking to them. So please, at conferences, use that opportunity. It can help you in multiple ways. In terms of promoting your research online, can I see a show of hands? How many of you are already doing that? Regardless of the platform. Fantastic. Well, that's going to be useful, not only, we mentioned earlier, helps to improve discoverability in Google Scholar, but it also helps to improve visibility of your paper. Every journal, every reputable journal, and every publisher actively promotes research online because it works. Here's an example. The editors of this journal wanted to test it. So how did they test it? Well, they randomly chose 68 articles from their journal that were not yet promoted online, published about the same time. 34 of them they promoted on social media. The other 34, they did not. They then tracked all 68 articles for 30 days, and they looked at both page views and downloads. Do you think they saw an effect?
Yeah, of
I
course.
wouldn't show this slide if they didn't, right? Of course, they saw a very strong effect. In the first column, we have the promoted articles on social media. In the second column, we have the ones that were not promoted. This is the median and interquartile range. And you can see the number of page views and downloads is significantly higher in those papers that were promoted because it works. It doesn't take much time to do. Summarize the importance of your article, put a link to the article so people know where to find it. Not only does that help you to improve discoverability, it's also going to help ensure you have more visibility as well. And lastly, I do encourage you to work with press offices. I work with a lot of press offices worldwide. And one of the biggest complaints is, and they're the ones who write the press release. You don't have to write it. You just have to work with them to write it. So they know what to emphasize, what's valuable. But the problem is there's very few press officers at a university, and there's a lot of researchers. So they don't have the power to actually go to every researcher. Do you have any newsworthy research? Do you have newsworthy research? They don't have time. They hope you go to them if you think you have a study that may be of interest to people outside of your field. Remember, they're not just writing press releases, they're also the ones managing your institutional website. So often on the front page of a website, they're highlighting research that's published from the university. Where do you think those stories come from? Press office. So if you want to be showcased on the institutional website, again, you need to reach out to the press office. And they often complain, very few people do. So if you think you do have something that may be of interest to people who are non-specialists outside of your field, do talk to them. And a number of studies have found that papers that have news stories written about them have more downloads and more citations. Not surprising, it's free publicity. The more visibility your research has, the increasing the likelihood that people will find your paper and read it. Remember, not only are non-researchers reading the news, researchers read the news as well. So again, you're increasing the likelihood that people come across what you've done. But from my own perspective and from Nature's perspective, you may have noticed the front half of Nature is all science journalism. And that's all freely available. The research articles are often behind a paywall unless it's open access. But the front half of Nature is freely available. And the reason for that is that we feel it is essential that people are aware of what's happening in various areas of research or science. The general public, they're not trained in your research area. They're being exposed to facts that they see on social media and the news. They can't validate if they're true or not. They're simply going to say, well, most of the stories I've seen said this, therefore it must be true. Well, if us as the researchers who have that evidence take the time to share it, either A, on social media, or B, with the news, we can ensure that those people have access to the real ideas, the real evidence. When I say general people, I'm not just talking the people on the street. We're talking policymakers, educators, people in industry, especially policymakers. We want to make sure that the laws and regulations that they develop is based on evidence, factual evidence. But they won't know what that is unless we take that time to share it. So I do strongly encourage you to be a bit more active in science communication, especially in Western countries, a lot of European countries, and US and Canada. Actually, in your grant proposal, you need to emphasize what is your public engagement strategy. How are you going to engage the public based on the research? And if you don't have that in your proposal, it may not be accepted. So it's getting more and more common to almost mandate that researchers have to educate the public, because the public is paying for your research anyway. It's their taxes paying for your research. They have a right to know what you've done. So, but using these strategies is also going to help to ensure that you have the best impact for your paper. So I encourage you, good titles, abstracts, keywords, great, but also use these additional strategies as well. So with that, that does bring us to the end of our session here this afternoon. I'm going to leave the rest of the time available for Q&A. I would also again encourage those of you who haven't used our Nature Masterclass On Demand platform. There's a lot of useful information. There's about 14 different courses that really support you throughout the research life cycle. And they're just small little modules. You just take a module here, that one interests me, that one interests me. And it's freely available, so I encourage you to make the most out of it. So with that, I'm also now happy to answer any questions that you may have, either about things we've discussed or anything else about academic publishing that you may be interested in. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Jeff. My name is Samuel, and I'm a PhD student in life science and medicine. So to begin with, and of course the effectiveness with which, the interactiveness with which you delivered was captivating to see the very least. So I have 3 statements to make, 2 are questions and 1 would be a comment. So the first question is, in the early part of your presentation, you did pop up a few slides, the third one I think, that tries to highlight the main components of what an effective title should look like. And then you talked about the variable, the sample, the outcome and result. So from your decades of experience in this business, what would you say is the technical difference between an outcome and a result, especially for some of us in the life sciences and medicine, with respect to publishing or writing a manuscript? That's the first question. And then the second question is, well, this